I was 28 years old, working double shifts as a paramedic for barely above minimum wage, when I performed CPR on a woman having a massive heart attack in the middle of rush hour traffic on Interstate 405. She couldn't speak, couldn't even open her eyes. But in those final moments before we loaded her into the ambulance, she squeezed my hand with a grip so fierce it left marks on my skin. I had no idea that the dying woman I cradled on that scorching asphalt, whispering reassurances while her heart struggled to beat, was Dr. Patricia Chen, the chief medical officer of Mercy General Hospital. Or that 4 months later, when I walked into the interview for the emergency department position I'd been dreaming about for 5 years, she would be sitting across from me at that conference table, very much alive and holding my entire future in her hands. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always love seeing our global community come together. If you enjoy stories about second chances and how one moment of compassion can change everything, make sure to hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these inspiring true stories. Now let me take you back to that suffocating July afternoon when I was just another exhausted paramedic, wondering if I'd ever escape the cycle of poverty wages and impossible hours, with no idea that the next emergency call would alter the entire trajectory of my life. The dispatch came through at 3:47 in the afternoon, right in the middle of the worst traffic jam Los Angeles had seen in months. My partner Jake was driving, weaving our ambulance through the gridlock with the kind of reckless precision that comes from 6 years of navigating city streets during emergencies. I was in the passenger seat, finishing the paperwork from our previous call, a diabetic episode that had turned out to be nothing more than a missed lunch and a panic attack. My hands ached from writing. Everything ached, actually. I'd been awake for 19 hours, covering a shift for another paramedic whose kid had the flu, and I still had 5 more hours before I could go home to my apartment. If you could call a converted garage with a hot plate and a mattress on the floor an apartment. Female, approximately 60 years old, unresponsive, possible cardiac event. Middle lane of the 405 northbound near Wilshire. The dispatcher's voice crackled through our radio. Multiple callers reporting woman collapsed at the wheel, vehicle stopped in traffic, bystanders attempting to provide assistance. I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline cut through my exhaustion. Cardiac events were always touch and go. Every second mattered. I grabbed the jump bag and checked our supplies while Jake hit the sirens and accelerated into the narrow gap between 2 semi-trucks. The heat was oppressive, the kind of dry Los Angeles heat that makes asphalt shimmer and turns car interiors into ovens. I could see the traffic ahead, cars packed so tightly that even with our sirens blaring, people had nowhere to go to let us through. "This is going to be tight," Jake muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I'd been a paramedic for 4 years, ever since I'd graduated from the accelerated program at LA City College. It wasn't what I'd planned for my life. I'd wanted to be a doctor, had spent my entire childhood watching medical dramas with my grandmother, memorizing the names of instruments and procedures, imagining myself in scrubs saving lives in a gleaming emergency room. But my grandmother died when I was 19, leaving me with nothing but her medical textbooks and a mountain of debt from her final hospital stay. Medical school became an impossible dream. The paramedic program was all I could afford, and even that required working 3 jobs to pay for it. My mother had been disappointed. "4 years of college and you're going to drive an ambulance?" she'd said, her voice tight with the kind of judgment that comes from her own abandoned dreams. She'd wanted to be a nurse but had gotten pregnant with me at 22 and never finished her degree. Now she worked as a medical receptionist, answering phones and filing insurance claims, watching doctors and nurses walk past her desk every day. She saw my choice to become a paramedic as settling, as giving up, as repeating her mistakes. But I loved the work. Even when it was exhausting, even when the pay was so low, I sometimes had to choose between groceries and gas. There was something profound about being the first person to reach someone in their worst moment, about having the skills to pull them back from the edge. I was good at it too. My hands stayed steady during codes. My voice stayed calm when patients were panicking. I could start an IV in a moving ambulance on a bumpy road. I could intubate in the dark. I could make split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. What I couldn't do was pay my rent on time. What I couldn't do was afford health insurance, which was darkly ironic for someone in healthcare. What I couldn't do was save enough money to apply to physician assistant programs, or go back to school, or do anything except survive, paycheck to paycheck. Always one emergency away from financial disaster. The traffic finally opened up enough for us to push through. I could see the scene ahead. A silver Mercedes stopped in the middle lane, hazard lights flashing, driver's door hanging open. A small crowd had gathered, people standing in the gaps between cars, some filming with their phones, others trying to help. I hated the phone people, the ones who saw a human being in crisis and thought to document it for social media, rather than render aid. Jake pulled the ambulance as close as he could get, and I was out before we'd fully stopped, jump bag over my shoulder, already assessing the scene. The woman was on the ground beside her car, lying on her back on the hot asphalt. A man in a business suit was attempting chest compressions, but his form was all wrong. His hands positioned too high, not enough depth to his compressions. A younger woman was on her phone, presumably with 911, her voice high and panicked. "Paramedics coming through," I called out, dropping to my knees beside the patient. The man doing compressions looked up at me with such relief that I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He'd been trying to help, doing his best with whatever CPR training he'd had, probably years ago in some corporate first aid course. "I don't know if I'm doing it right," he said, his voice shaking. She just collapsed. 1 second she was sitting in her car, and then she fell forward onto the horn, and when I opened the door she wasn't breathing. "You did great," I told him, because he had. He'd tried. He'd stopped. So many people wouldn't have. "I've got her now." The woman was in her early 60s, well-dressed in a navy blazer and cream blouse, her gray hair cut in a professional bob. Her skin had that grayish pallor that meant poor circulation, and when I checked for a pulse, I found nothing. No breathing, no heartbeat. Full cardiac arrest. Jake was already beside me with the defibrillator, and I ripped open her blouse. Not caring about modesty because modesty didn't matter when someone was dying. The buttons scattered across the asphalt, tiny white circles bouncing and rolling between people's feet. "Get the airway kit," I said to Jake, my hands moving through the familiar choreography of emergency medicine. "Attach the defibrillator pads, check the rhythm." Ventricular fibrillation, which meant her heart was quivering uselessly instead of pumping. The defibrillator would shock it, hopefully reset it into a normal rhythm. "Everybody clear!" The shock made her body jerk, a horrible puppet-like movement that never got easier to watch no matter how many times I'd seen it. I checked the monitor. Still V-fib. Started compressions, counting in my head, feeling her ribs flex under my palms. The asphalt was scorching hot, burning through my uniform pants where I knelt. Sweat was already running down my face, stinging my eyes. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to see, to help, to witness this moment of crisis. "How long was she down before you started CPR?" I asked the businessman, not stopping my compressions. "Maybe 2 minutes? 3? I don't know. It felt like forever." 2 or 3 minutes was good. Brain damage started after 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen. We had a chance. I kept compressing, kept counting, kept fighting for this stranger's life in the middle of a highway surrounded by strangers. Jake got the bag valve mask over her face, started forcing oxygen into her lungs. Another shock. Still V-fib. More compressions. My arms were burning, my shoulders screaming. but I didn't stop. You never stop. You keep going until they come back, or until a doctor calls it. Come on, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Come on, stay with me. I pushed the epinephrine, the drug that would hopefully jumpstart her heart, give us something to work with. More compressions. Another shock. And then, finally, miraculously, the monitor showed a rhythm. Not a great rhythm, irregular and weak, but a rhythm. A pulse. Thready and fast, but there. She was alive. Jake and I worked in perfect synchronization, the kind of wordless coordination that comes from hundreds of calls together. We got her on the backboard, secured her airway, started an IV line, loaded her onto the gurney. The crowd parted as we wheeled her toward the ambulance, and I saw their faces, the relief and awe and fear. Some were crying. The businessman who'd done CPR was sitting on the curb with his head in his hands, shaking. Just before we loaded her into the ambulance, her eyes fluttered open. Just for a second. She couldn't speak, the tube in her throat preventing any words, but she looked at me. Really looked at me. Her hand moved, just slightly, and I took it without thinking, squeezed it gently. You're going to be okay, I told her, even though I didn't know if that was true, even though she might not survive the ride to the hospital, even though she might have brain damage from the minutes without oxygen. We've got you. You're safe. Her fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength, a grip so fierce it hurt. She held on like I was the only thing keeping her tethered to life, like letting go would mean slipping away into darkness. Her eyes, pale blue and terrified, locked onto mine, and I saw something in them that I'd seen in so many patients' eyes before. The desperate need to be seen, to be known, to matter in this moment when everything hung in the balance. I'm Sarah, I said, because sometimes people needed to know your name, needed that human connection. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. She squeezed again, and then her eyes closed as we lifted her into the ambulance. Jake drove while I monitored her vitals, adjusted medications, called ahead to Mercy General to let them know we were coming in hot with a cardiac arrest, female, early 60s, return of spontaneous circulation after 3 shocks and 2 rounds of epinephrine. The ER would be ready. They'd have a team waiting. My job was to keep her alive for the next 12 minutes until we got there. She coded again on the way, her heart giving up, and I had to do more compressions in the back of a moving ambulance, bracing myself against the walls while Jake took corners too fast because speed mattered more than comfort. Another shock. Another round of drugs. And then, impossibly, her heart started again. By the time we pulled into the ambulance bay at Mercy General, she had a steady rhythm. Her blood pressure was stabilizing, and I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd make it. The ER team swarmed us the moment we opened the doors. I gave my report to the attending physician, a stern-faced man named Dr. Morrison who I'd worked with dozens of times, rattling off times and medications and interventions while they transferred her to their gurney and wheeled her away. Just before she disappeared through the double doors into the trauma bay, I saw her hand move again, reaching out, searching for something. Searching for me, maybe, but I couldn't follow. My job was done. I'd gotten her here alive. The rest was up to them. Jake and I cleaned the ambulance, restocked our supplies, and got back in service. We had 3 more calls before our shift ended. A drunk college student who'd fallen off a balcony, a child with a fever, and an elderly man having a stroke. Normal calls, routine emergencies. Nothing that made my hands shake the way that cardiac arrest had. There was something about her, about the way she'd looked at me, about the fierce grip of her hand that stayed with me long after we'd dropped her off. I went home that night to my converted garage apartment, heated up a can of soup on my hot plate, and fell asleep on my mattress on the floor, too exhausted to even shower. I dreamed about her pale blue eyes, about her hand in mine, about the way her body had jerked with each shock from the defibrillator. I woke up the next morning with bruises on my hand where she'd squeezed, 5 small marks like fingerprints, and I wondered if she'd survived the night. I never followed up on patients. It was an unspoken rule among paramedics. We saw people at their worst, did what we could, and then let them go. Following up meant getting attached, meant caring too much, meant opening yourself up to the grief of all the ones you couldn't save. But I thought about her. For days afterward, I thought about her. I wondered if she'd woken up, if she could speak, if she had family at her bedside. I wondered if she remembered me at all, or if those moments on the highway had been swallowed by the darkness of unconsciousness and trauma. 2 weeks later, I got a letter at the station. It was addressed to the Paramedic Team, Unit 17, Los Angeles County Fire Department. And when I opened it, a check fell out. $500, made out to me personally. The letter was typed, formal, and brief. Thank you for saving my life. I will never forget what you did for me. With deepest gratitude, Patricia Chen. $500 was more money than I'd ever received at once in my life. It was groceries for 2 months. It was my car insurance payment. It was the difference between barely surviving and having a tiny cushion of safety. I stared at it for a long time. This check from a stranger whose life I'd saved. And I felt something shift in my chest. She'd remembered. She'd cared enough to find out who I was, to send this money, to say thank you. In a job where gratitude was rare and recognition even rarer, this felt like being seen. I deposited the check and used it to pay off some of my credit card debt. I didn't try to contact her. What would I say? You're welcome for not letting you die? It seemed presumptuous, awkward. I filed the letter away in the shoebox where I kept important documents and tried not to think about her anymore. But I did think about her. I thought about her when I was running calls, when I was doing compressions on other patients, when I was lying awake at night in my garage apartment wondering if this was all my life would ever be. I thought about how she'd looked at me, really looked at me, and seen someone worth thanking, someone who mattered. 4 months after that call, I saw a job posting that made my heart stop. Mercy General Hospital was hiring for their emergency department, looking for experienced paramedics to transition into ED tech positions with the possibility of sponsorship for PA school. It was everything I'd ever wanted. A stable job in a hospital, decent pay, benefits, and a pathway to becoming a physician assistant. The chance to do more than just stabilize and transport. The chance to actually save lives in a place with resources and support and a team of specialists. I applied immediately, staying up until 2 a.m. to perfect my resume and cover letter. I emphasized my 4 years of experience, my success rate with difficult procedures, my ability to stay calm under pressure. I listed my certifications, my continuing education courses, the commendations I'd received from supervisors. I poured everything I had into that application, knowing it was probably futile, knowing that hundreds of other paramedics with better credentials and more connections would be applying too. When I got the call 3 weeks later asking me to come in for an interview, I actually cried. Just sat on my mattress on the floor and sobbed with relief and terror and hope. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, and I had exactly one professional outfit. A black blazer I'd bought at Goodwill and a pair of gray slacks that were slightly too big. I borrowed a nice blouse from my coworker Maria and spent my last $30 on getting my hair cut and styled at a discount salon. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, rehearsing answers to potential questions, trying to calm my racing heart. This was it. This was my chance to escape the cycle of poverty wages and impossible hours. This was my chance to become something more than just the person who showed up when you called 911. I thought about my grandmother, about how proud she would have been. I thought about my mother, about how maybe this would finally prove to her that I hadn't given up, that I was still reaching for something better. I thought about Patricia Chen and her thank you letter and wondered if she was still alive, if she'd recovered fully, if she ever thought about the paramedic who'd done chest compressions on her in the middle of a highway. The morning of the interview, I woke up early and spent an hour getting ready. I put on the borrowed blouse, the Goodwill blazer, the 2 big slacks. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone trying very hard to look professional, trying very hard to belong in a world of doctors and hospitals and stable careers. I saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the worry lines forming at 28, the desperate hope that this might finally be the thing that changed everything. I drove to Mercy General with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The hospital was enormous, a sprawling complex of buildings that took up an entire city block. I'd been here dozens of times, dropping off patients in the emergency department, but I'd never gone beyond those double doors. I'd never seen the offices, the conference rooms, the places where decisions were made about who got hired and who got to stay in the garage apartment forever. The HR department directed me to the 3rd floor, to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I was 15 minutes early, which meant I sat in the waiting area trying not to fidget, trying not to let my anxiety show on my face. 2 other candidates were waiting too, both of them younger than me, both of them looking confident and polished in ways I knew I didn't. When they called my name, I stood up and followed the HR representative down a hallway lined with photographs of the hospital's history. We passed images of the original building from the 1950s, of doctors in white coats standing in front of new equipment, of ribbon-cutting ceremonies and award presentations. This was a place with history, with prestige, with standards I wasn't sure I could meet. The conference room was large and intimidating, with a long table and 6 chairs. 3 of them were already occupied. The HR representative who'd walked me in sat at one end. A man in a white coat with Dr. Morrison on his name tag sat in the middle, the same attending physician I'd given reports to dozens of times in the ER. And at the other end, sitting very straight in her chair with her hands folded on the table in front of her, was Patricia Chen. I stopped walking. Actually stopped in the doorway, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. It was her. Older than she'd looked lying on the highway. Healthier, obviously, with color in her cheeks and clarity in her eyes. But it was definitely her. The same gray hair. The same pale blue eyes. The same face I'd seen looking up at me in terror and desperation while I counted compressions and begged her to stay alive. She was looking at me too, and I saw the moment of recognition flash across her face. Her eyes widened slightly. Her hands, folded so carefully on the table, tightened until her knuckles went white. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The room was completely silent. "Ms. Martinez?" the HR representative said, gesturing to the empty chair across from the panel. "Please, have a seat." I somehow made my legs work, somehow crossed the room and sat down in the chair without falling over. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. The woman whose life I'd saved, the woman who'd sent me a thank you letter and $500, was sitting across from me at my job interview, was part of the panel that would decide my future. Dr. Morrison spoke first, introducing himself and the others. "I'm Dr. Robert Morrison, attending physician in the emergency department. This is Janet Wu from Human Resources, and this is Dr. Patricia Chen, our Chief Medical Officer." He gestured to Patricia Chen, and I felt the room tilt slightly. Chief Medical Officer. She wasn't just a doctor. She was the Chief Medical Officer. She was one of the most powerful people in the entire hospital. "Ms. Martinez," Dr. Morrison continued, looking down at the papers in front of him. "I see you've been a paramedic with LA County for 4 years. That's a solid track record. Tell us why you're interested in transitioning to an ED tech position here at Mercy General." I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. I was staring at Patricia Chen, and she was staring back at me, and the air in the room felt thick and impossible to breathe. I saw her hand move slightly, as if reaching for something, and I remembered the fierce grip of her fingers on the highway, the desperate strength in that squeeze. "Ms. Martinez?" Dr. Morrison prompted, and I forced myself to look at him instead of her. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice coming out rough. I'm interested in this position because I want to do more than just stabilize and transport. I want to be part of a team that sees patients through their entire emergency, that has the resources and support to really make a difference. As a paramedic, I get 12 minutes with a patient, maybe 15. Here, I could be part of their care for hours, could see them recover, could learn from specialists and expand my skills. It was a good answer. I'd practiced it 100 times. But I was barely aware of what I was saying because Patricia Chen was still staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it recognition? Gratitude? Something else entirely? Janet Wu asked the next question, something about my experience with trauma patients, and I answered on autopilot, my brain still trying to process the impossibility of this situation. Dr. Morrison asked about my success rate with difficult procedures. I told him about starting IVs and moving ambulances, about intubating in the dark, about the cardiac arrest saves I'd had over the years. "Speaking of cardiac arrests," Dr. Morrison said, flipping through my file, "I see here that you have a particularly high success rate with those. 73% return of spontaneous circulation. That's well above the national average for paramedics. What do you attribute that to?" I took a breath, trying to focus. I think it's about not giving up, about understanding that every second matters, every compression matters. I've seen too many people quit too early, decide it's futile, call time of death when maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. I don't believe in giving up on people. Patricia Chen made a small sound, almost a gasp, and I looked at her without meaning to. Her eyes were bright with tears that she was clearly trying to hold back. Her hand was pressed against her chest, right over her heart. And she was looking at me like I'd just said something profound, instead of just explaining my job. "Dr. Chen," Janet Wu said, noticing the same thing I had. "Did you have a question for Ms. Martinez?" Patricia Chen cleared her throat, and when she spoke, her voice was steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "Actually, yes. Ms. Martinez, can you tell us about a time when you went above and beyond for a patient? A time when you did something that wasn't strictly required but that you felt was the right thing to do?" The question hung in the air between us, and I knew exactly what she was asking. She was asking me to tell them about her, about that day on the highway, about holding her hand and telling her she wasn't alone. But I couldn't tell that story without revealing that I knew who she was. Without making this entire interview about that one moment instead of about my qualifications and skills. "There are a lot of moments like that," I said carefully. "Paramedic work isn't just about medical interventions. It's about human connection. I've held hands with dying patients so they wouldn't be alone. I've called family members to let them know their loved ones were safe. I've stayed after my shift ended to make sure a patient got admitted to the hospital instead of being turned away. I've given patients my own food when they were hungry, my own jacket when they were cold. I think that's what the job requires, not just medical skill, but compassion." "Even when it costs you something?" Patricia Chen asked, and her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Even when helping someone means sacrificing something you need yourself?" I met her eyes and saw the question beneath the question. She was asking if I'd do it again, if I'd stop on that highway again, knowing nothing about who she was, knowing only that she needed help. If I'd hold her hand and tell her she wasn't alone, even if it meant nothing for my future, even if she'd been just another stranger whose name I'd never know. "Especially then," I said, "because that's when it matters most. When helping someone costs you something, When it's inconvenient or difficult or scary, that's when you find out who you really are. I'd rather be someone who helps, even at a cost to myself, than someone who walks past because it's easier. The room was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Morrison was writing something down. Janet Wu was watching Patricia Chen with a curious expression, and Patricia Chen was looking at me like I'd just answered every question she'd ever had about anything. "Ms. Martinez," Dr. Morrison said, breaking the silence. "We have several more candidates to interview today, but I want you to know that your experience and your approach to patient care are exactly what we're looking for in this position. We'll be making our decision by the end of the week, and HR will contact you regardless of the outcome." It was a dismissal, polite but clear. The interview was over. I stood up, shook hands with Dr. Morrison and Janet Wu, and then turned to Patricia Chen. She stood too, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the conference table. Then she extended her hand, and I took it. Her grip was firm and warm. Nothing like the desperate squeeze on the highway, but she held on just a second longer than necessary, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming in today, Ms. Martinez. It was truly a pleasure to meet you." I wanted to say something, wanted to acknowledge what we both knew, wanted to tell her how glad I was that she'd survived, that she'd recovered, that she was here and alive and well. But with Dr. Morrison and Janet Wu watching, all I could do was nod and squeeze her hand gently in return. "The pleasure was mine, Dr. Chen." I walked out of that conference room in a daze, took the elevator down to the lobby, and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes trying to process what had just happened. She'd been there. The woman whose life I'd saved had been sitting across from me at my job interview. The woman who'd sent me a thank you letter and $500 was the chief medical officer of the hospital I desperately wanted to work for. And I had no idea if that was going to help me or hurt me. Had I answered the questions well enough? Had my qualifications been sufficient? Or had the entire interview been overshadowed by that moment on the highway, by the connection we'd shared, by the impossible coincidence of our meeting again? I drove home and spent the rest of the day pacing my garage apartment, replaying every word of the interview in my mind. I called Maria and told her everything, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "She's the CMO?" Maria kept saying. "The woman you saved is the chief medical officer?" "Sarah, this is insane. This is like something out of a movie. You're definitely getting that job." But I wasn't so sure. What if Patricia Chen thought I'd only applied because of her? What if she thought I was trying to leverage that moment on the highway for personal gain? What if she wanted to help me but couldn't because it would look like favoritism? What if? The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. I worked my regular shifts, ran my regular calls, and tried not to check my phone every 5 minutes. Jake noticed I was distracted and asked if I was okay, and I told him I was just tired, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was exhausted from anxiety, from hope, from the constant mental gymnastics of trying to figure out what Patricia Chen was thinking. On Friday afternoon, exactly 6 days after the interview, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I was in the ambulance between calls, and I almost didn't answer it because I was so terrified it would be bad news. But I did answer, my hand shaking as I brought the phone to my ear. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Sarah." "This is Janet Wu from Mercy General Hospital Human Resources. I'm calling about your interview for the ED tech position." My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The world narrowed down to Janet Wu's voice on the other end of the line. "We'd like to offer you the position," she said, and I heard the smile in her voice. "Dr. Chen was particularly impressed with your interview and your qualifications. She said you demonstrated exactly the kind of compassionate, skilled care we're looking for at Mercy General. The position starts in 2 weeks, if that works for your schedule, and we'll be sponsoring your enrollment in the PA program starting next fall." I started crying right there in the ambulance, tears streaming down my face while Jake stared at me in alarm. I tried to speak, to thank Janet Wu, to accept the offer, but all I could manage was a choked yes and thank you, repeated over and over until she gently told me she'd email me the paperwork and hung up. "What happened?" Jake demanded. "Sarah, what's going on?" "I got it," I managed to say through my tears. "I got the job. I'm going to work at Mercy General. I'm going to go to PA school." "Jake, I got it." He whooped so loud the dispatcher called to ask if we needed assistance, and we both started laughing, this wild, relieved laughter that felt like release after months of tension. I'd done it. Against all odds, with my Goodwill blazer and my garage apartment and my mountain of debt, I'd gotten the job that would change my life. That night, I sat on my mattress on the floor and thought about Patricia Chen. I thought about her hand in mine on the highway, about the fierce grip of her fingers, about the terror in her pale blue eyes. I thought about her sitting across from me in that conference room, asking if I'd help someone even when it cost me something, even when it was inconvenient or difficult or scary. I thought about how she must have felt, recognizing me, remembering that moment when she'd been dying and I'd been the one to pull her back. I thought about how she'd kept her composure during the interview, how she'd asked her questions and listened to my answers, and then, somehow, advocated for me to get this job. I wanted to thank her, wanted to tell her how much this meant to me, how she'd given me a chance at a future I'd thought was impossible. But I didn't have her contact information beyond the hospital, and reaching out felt presumptuous. She'd done enough. She'd given me this opportunity. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable by bringing up that day on the highway, by forcing her to relive what must have been one of the most terrifying experiences of her life. So I didn't reach out. I just sat in my garage apartment and felt grateful and hopeful and terrified and excited all at once. I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the fire department, and my supervisor congratulated me even though I could tell he was disappointed to lose an experienced paramedic. My coworkers threw me a small party at the station, and Maria cried and made me promise to stay in touch. My mother called when she heard the news, and for the first time in years, I heard pride in her voice. "I always knew you'd do something amazing," she said, which wasn't exactly true, but I appreciated the sentiment. "Your grandmother would be so proud." The 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and goodbyes and nervous anticipation. I bought new scrubs with some of the money I'd saved from Patricia Chen's thank you check, a strange, full-circle moment that made me smile. I found a better apartment. Nothing fancy, but an actual bedroom and kitchen instead of a converted garage. I felt like my life was finally moving forward instead of just treading water. My first day at Mercy General was overwhelming in the best way. The emergency department was enormous, with separate sections for trauma, pediatrics, and general emergencies. The staff was professional and welcoming, and the resources were incredible compared to what I'd had in the ambulance. I had an entire team of doctors and nurses and specialists to consult with. I had equipment that actually worked. I had time to spend with patients, to really care for them instead of just stabilizing and rushing to the next call. Dr. Morrison was my supervisor, and he was tough but fair, pushing me to expand my skills while acknowledging what I already knew. The other ED techs were friendly and helpful, showing me where everything was kept, teaching me the hospital's protocols and procedures. I felt competent and valued in a way I never had as a paramedic, where I was always just the person who dropped patients off and left. I didn't see Patricia Chen for the first 3 weeks. The CMO didn't spend much time in the emergency department, and I was too busy learning my new job to go looking for her. But I thought about her often, wondered if she knew how I was doing, if she'd heard good things about my work, if she ever thought about that day on the highway. Then, on a Tuesday morning during my 4th week, I was restocking supplies in one of the trauma bays when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Ms. Martinez? I turned around, and there she was. Patricia Chen, in a white coat with her title embroidered on the pocket, looking every inch the chief medical officer. But her eyes were warm, and she was smiling, and I felt that same jolt of recognition I'd felt in the interview. Dr. Chen? I said, suddenly nervous. Hi, hello. Good morning. She laughed, a soft sound that eased some of my anxiety. Good morning. I've been hearing excellent things about your work. Dr. Morrison says you're one of the best ED techs we've ever had, and you've only been here a month. I felt my face heat with embarrassment and pride. I'm just doing my job. You're doing more than that, she said, and her voice was serious now. You're bringing the same compassion and dedication you showed as a paramedic. The same compassion you showed me. There it was. The acknowledgement I'd been waiting for. The direct reference to that day on the highway. I didn't know what to say, how to respond. Thank you seemed inadequate. Your welcome seemed presumptuous. I never got to properly thank you, Patricia Chen continued, stepping closer. I was unconscious for most of it, and by the time I woke up in the ICU, you were gone. But the other paramedic, your partner, he told me what you did. How you wouldn't give up. How you kept fighting for me even when my heart stopped twice. How you held my hand and told me I wasn't alone. I remembered Jake telling me he'd gone back to check on her, had wanted to know if she'd survived. He'd never mentioned talking to her, but I should have known he would. Jake was sentimental like that. I was just doing my job, I said again, because I didn't know what else to say. No, Patricia Chen said firmly. You are being exactly who you are. Compassionate, skilled, dedicated. The kind of person who stops to help even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something. That's not just doing your job. That's being exceptional. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, holding it in her closed hand. I want to show you something, she said, opening her hand to reveal a small silver pin in the shape of a heart with wings. This is the symbol for emergency medical services. I had it made after I recovered, and I carry it with me every day as a reminder. A reminder of what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A reminder that I'm alive because someone cared enough to save me. A reminder that compassion matters more than credentials. A reminder that the best healthcare providers aren't the ones with the most impressive resumes, but the ones who see every patient as a human being worth fighting for. She closed her hand around the pin and looked at me with those pale blue eyes that I'd seen filled with terror and now saw filled with gratitude. You reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place, why I chose this career, and I wanted to make sure that when I had the chance, I helped someone who embodies those same values. I felt tears burning in my eyes and blinked them back. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to hire me. I would have understood if... If what? She interrupted gently. If I'd let someone else get the job because it might look like favoritism? Sarah, you earned this position. Your qualifications were excellent. Your interview was excellent. Yes, I advocated for you, but I would have done that for any candidate who demonstrated your level of skill and compassion. The fact that you saved my life just meant I knew firsthand exactly what kind of person you are. She put the pin back in her pocket and smiled. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're part of our team. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the lives you're going to change, the way you changed mine. Before I could respond, her pager went off. She glanced at it and sighed. I have to go. But Sarah, if you ever need anything, if you have questions or concerns or just want to talk, my door is always open. I mean that. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. And Sarah, thank you for everything. Then she was gone, walking quickly down the hallway with her white coat flowing behind her, and I was left standing in the trauma bay with tears running down my face and a feeling in my chest like my heart might burst. The months that followed were the best of my life. I threw myself into my work at Mercy General, learning everything I could, building relationships with the staff, caring for patients with the same dedication I'd always brought to emergency medicine. Dr. Morrison became a mentor, teaching me advanced procedures and encouraging me to apply to the PA program. The other ED techs became my friends, people I could laugh with during the slow shifts and rely on during the chaotic ones. I moved into my new apartment and slowly made it feel like home. I bought actual furniture instead of just a mattress on the floor. I could afford groceries without having to choose between food and gas. I started paying down my debt, slowly but steadily. I felt, for the first time in my adult life, like I had a future that wasn't just survival, but actual growth and possibility. Patricia Chen and I developed a quiet friendship. She'd stop by the ED sometimes to check on things, and we'd talk about patients, about medicine, about life. She told me about her recovery, about the months of cardiac rehab and lifestyle changes, about the fear that had haunted her for weeks after the heart attack. She told me about her family, her 2 adult children who'd been terrified of losing her, her husband who'd barely left her side in the ICU. I told her about my grandmother, about wanting to be a doctor, about the financial realities that had made that impossible. She listened without judgment, without pity, and then quietly arranged for the hospital to cover my application fees for PA school. When I tried to thank her, she just smiled and said, "Consider it an investment in excellent future healthcare." I applied to 3 PA programs and got accepted to all of them. I chose the one affiliated with Mercy General, a 2-year program that would allow me to continue working part-time in the ED while I studied. It felt surreal, like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. But it was real. It was happening. I was going to become a physician assistant. The day I got my acceptance letter, I went to Patricia Chen's office. Her assistant tried to tell me she was busy, but Patricia saw me through the glass door and waved me in immediately. "You got in," she said. Not a question, but a statement. Reading the joy on my face. "I got in," I confirmed. And then I was crying again. These happy, overwhelmed tears that seemed to be my default emotional state lately. I can't believe this is real. I can't believe this is my life now. Patricia came around her desk and, to my surprise, pulled me into a hug. "Believe it," she said softly. "You earned every bit of this. Your grandmother would be so proud. I'm so proud." We stood there in her office, this woman I'd saved and who had saved me in return, holding on to each other while I cried happy tears, and she whispered encouragement. When I finally pulled back, she was crying too, and we both laughed at ourselves, 2 medical professionals who'd seen countless traumas and emergencies, but were undone by this moment of pure joy. "I have something for you," Patricia said, wiping her eyes and going back to her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small box, handing it to me. "Open it." Inside was the silver pin she'd shown me months ago, the heart with wings, the symbol of emergency medical services. I looked up at her in confusion. "I had 2 made," she explained. "One for me to carry as a reminder, and one for you. Because you're the reason I'm still here. You're the reason I got to see my children graduate, got to celebrate my 35th wedding anniversary, got to continue doing the work I love. You gave me my life back, Sarah. This is just a small token of gratitude for something that can never truly be repaid." I pinned it to my scrubs, right over my heart, and looked at Patricia Chen through fresh tears. "Thank you," I managed to say. "For everything. For this job. For the PA program support. For believing in me. For seeing me." "You made yourself seen," she said gently, "by being exactly who you are. Compassionate, skilled, dedicated. Never lose that, Sarah. No matter how much you learn, no matter how many degrees you earn, never lose that fundamental kindness that makes you who you are. I promised her I wouldn't, and I meant it. 2 years later, I graduated from the PA program at the top of my class. Patricia Chen was there in the audience, sitting next to my mother, both of them crying proud tears. I'd been offered a position as a physician assistant in Mercy General's emergency department, working alongside Dr. Morrison and the team I'd come to love. My student loans were manageable. My apartment was comfortable. My life was stable and full of purpose. But more than any of that, I'd learned something profound about the nature of kindness and connection. I'd learned that sometimes the people we help become the people who help us. That compassion creates ripples we can't always see or predict. That stopping to hold someone's hand in their darkest moment can change both of your lives in ways you never imagined. I still think about that day on the highway sometimes, about the heat of the asphalt, the crowd of strangers, the desperate grip of Patricia Chen's hand in mine. About how I almost didn't stop, almost kept driving to my next call, almost missed the moment that would transform my entire future. I think about all the people I've helped over the years, in the ambulance and in the emergency department, and I wonder about the ripples, about the lives saved that went on to save other lives, about the hands held that gave someone the strength to hold another's hand, about the compassion shown that inspired others to show compassion in turn. Last month, I was working a shift in the ED when we got a call about an incoming trauma. Car accident, multiple injuries, one patient in critical condition. When the ambulance arrived and the paramedics wheeled in the patient, I saw a young woman, maybe 25, doing compressions with fierce determination while her partner managed the airway. She was sweating, exhausted, but her hands never stopped moving, never gave up. They transferred the patient to our care, and the young paramedic gave her report with the kind of detailed precision that spoke to real skill and dedication. When she was done, I walked over to her. "Good work," I said. "Really excellent compressions. You gave him a real chance." She looked at me with tired eyes and managed a small smile. "Just doing my job." "You're doing more than that," I told her, and I meant it. You're being exactly who you are, and that matters more than you know. She looked surprised, then grateful, and I saw something in her face that I recognized. The exhaustion, yes, but also the determination. The commitment to helping people even when it was hard, even when it cost her something. The fundamental kindness that made her stop and fight for a stranger's life. "Are you happy doing this?" I asked her. "Being a paramedic?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's hard. The pay is terrible, the hours are brutal, and sometimes I wonder if I'm making any real difference. But I can't imagine doing anything else. When I save someone, when I see them survive because of what I did, it makes everything worth it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever want to do more, if you ever want to transition to hospital work or pursue further education, give me a call. We're always looking for people with your skills and your heart." She took the card and looked at it, then at me, with something like hope dawning in her eyes. "Really?" "Really," I said. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who taught me that compassion and skill combined can change lives, including your own." She thanked me and left, and I watched her walk back to her ambulance with a little more spring in her step, a little more hope in her posture. Maybe she'd call. Maybe she wouldn't. But I'd planted a seed, the way Patricia Chen had planted a seed in me. And maybe that seed would grow into something beautiful. That's what I've learned in this journey from paramedic to physician assistant, from garage apartment to stable career, from invisible to seen. That kindness creates opportunities. That compassion opens doors. That the people we help today might be the people who help us tomorrow. or help someone else next week, or inspire a stranger next year. That every hand held, every life saved, every moment of genuine human connection creates ripples that spread further than we can see. And that sometimes, if we're very lucky, those ripples come back to us in ways we never expected, transforming not just one life, but many. I still wear the silver pin Patricia Chen gave me, the heart with wings, pinned to my scrubs every day. It's a reminder of where I came from and where I am now. A reminder that I'm here because someone saw my worth and gave me a chance. A reminder that I have a responsibility to do the same for others. And every time I see a patient in crisis, every time I hold a hand or offer comfort or fight to save a life, I remember that moment on the highway. The heat of the asphalt, the desperate grip of fingers, the pale blue eyes looking up at me with terror and trust. I remember that I almost didn't stop, almost kept driving, almost missed the moment that changed everything. I remember, and I'm grateful. Grateful for the chance to help, grateful for the chance to grow, grateful for the unexpected ways that compassion comes back to us when we least expect it. Grateful for Patricia Chen and her fierce grip and her belief in me. Grateful for every patient I've helped and every colleague who's helped me. Grateful for this life, this career, this purpose. And I make sure every single day that I never walk past someone who needs help, that I never let fear or inconvenience or self-interest stop me from being the person who stops, who cares, who fights for others the way Patricia Chen fought to give me this chance. Because that's what it means to be truly alive. Not just surviving, but connecting. Not just existing, but making a difference. Not just working, but caring deeply about the work and the people it serves. That's the legacy of that day on the highway. That's the gift Patricia Chen gave me when she squeezed my hand and, months later, sat across from me in that interview and asked if I'd help someone even when it cost me something. The answer was yes then. The answer is yes now. The answer will always be yes. Because some things matter more than convenience. Some things matter more than comfort. Some things matter more than our own immediate needs. Human connection matters. Compassion matters. Showing up for each other in our darkest moments matters. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to stop, to help, to care, those moments of compassion come back to us in ways we never imagined, transforming our lives and the lives of everyone we touch. That's the story of how I went from a struggling paramedic in a garage apartment to a physician assistant at one of the best hospitals in Los Angeles. That's the story of how one moment of kindness on a highway changed 2 lives forever. That's the story of how compassion creates opportunities we can't predict and connections that last a lifetime. And it all started with a squeeze of a hand and a whispered promise. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. I kept that promise to Patricia Chen on the highway. She kept her promise to me in that conference room. And now I keep that promise to every patient I meet, every colleague I mentor, every person who crosses my path in need of help. Because that's what we do. We show up. We care. We fight for each other. And in doing so, we create a world where compassion isn't just a nice idea, but a lived reality that transforms lives. What an incredible journey this has been, from that scorching afternoon on Interstate 405 to this moment now, wearing my white coat and my silver pin, working alongside people I admire in a career I love. Sarah's story reminds us that true worth isn't measured by titles or credentials, but by the compassion we show when no one's watching and the courage we have to help even when it costs us something. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have stopped to help, knowing what it might cost you? Have you ever made a choice between doing what's expected and doing what's right? Share your story in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that compassion matters more than status, that kindness is never wasted, and that integrity is priceless, please show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our inspiring stories about real people whose kindness and courage changed their lives. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.